Hey everybody, welcome back to my basement. This is either Fear Part 3 or Jeff's Basement series, depending on what you want to call it. It's been really fun to bring you these messages from my basement, and it's also been really difficult to not talk to an audience and just kind of look at a camera. It's not my thing, but I really hope that this kind of makes your Sunday a little more normal if you're watching this on a Sunday, or if you stayed awake really late on Saturday night and caught it. Just thank you for watching these and for spreading the good news even in this kind of time. It's crazy times we live in. Today, we've got a story coming to you from 1 Kings 18, and the main theme here, other than fear, is the fact that sometimes God will put you in a training room and kind of just leave you there to lift weights for a while. And what I mean by that is God is not, in the Bible, God is not really in the mood for building, not really in the mood for taking you out of a situation rather than building you up to have a greater ministry or a greater impact on someone. So whenever you see in the Bible someone get left on a shelf, which is what's going to happen with Elijah today, I'm backtracking a little bit. And maybe you feel like you've been left on a shelf. That's what God does. He'll sometimes leave you to sort things out while he makes you stronger through something. And the funny thing is, I think the whole nation right now is getting left on the proverbial shelf. Now, that's not Jeff speaking. I actually took this kind of inspiration from another message that I watched last Sunday, and it was on the same passage, and the pastor said something to the effect of, sometimes God will leave you to sort things out. It'll leave you on that shelf to make sure that when you come out of that, you know something bigger about your faith. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I've kind of been left on a shelf at times. I think everybody has, if God's going to use you for something. Right now, it kind of feels like, in my other career, which is teaching, it kind of feels like things are just stopped. We were in the middle of a unit on ancient Greece. We were doing some papers and things like that. And now all of a sudden, it's as if that stuff has kind of just gone away in favor of doing things completely online and working with my coworkers to come up with creative stuff to do. And I kind of find myself, sitting there going, what is the point? Like, not what's the point of teaching people, but what's the point of doing it in this medium? It just seems so unpersonal, I'm used to being around kids all day, mentoring my students, talking to them about not only classroom issues, but bigger life issues. And now all of a sudden that's just done. It's not even summer vacation. Teachers a lot of times have to do something else. I'm one of those during summer vacation or any types of times when we have a downtime or a break, because we're so wired up that, can you tell, that we just can't take it easy. And it's been really difficult to kind of just do nothing. I started reading a book recently, not even a book that would help me in life, just like a book. And I know I continually tell my students to continue reading things, but I noticed something about myself. I only read informational text usually. I don't ever just sit down and read for fun anymore. So that's been really interesting. Maybe you've got some stuff that you've been going through that's just like that. But anyway, I want to get in today to the passage here. We're in 1 Kings 18. And what you need to know is that I skipped over some stuff last week. Last week we talked about Elijah. We talked about the first time that Elijah is mentioned in the Bible. And the first time Elijah is mentioned in the Bible, he calls down a drought on the biggest king in the area, King Ahab. All of a sudden, like, Elijah just bursts into the scene, right? He opens the door. It's kind of a Wild West metaphor, and you'll find Wild West metaphors throughout today's message, but it's like he busted in through the double doors, right? And he goes, there's a drought. And all of a sudden, no rain, right? And what's really ironic about that is that these people worshiped the god Baal. And if you know your biblical history, you know that Baal is the god of storms, literally the god of making rainfall from the sky. And so Elijah does the unthinkable. The first time that he is mentioned as being a prophet, he is calling down a drought and making a big affront to like the biggest god in the area, which is Baal. This is a big deal, huge deal. And this drought, as far as we know, lasted about 3 years in the entire land. No water fell in 3 years, just as Elijah predicted. Now, as soon as that happens to Elijah, last week we talked about this. If you want to go back and rewatch it, you can. Elijah gets sent to live by a creek. And God not only says you're going to go live by this creek, but you can't leave because birds are going to bring you your food. And of course, I'm kind of imagining this scenario like I just burst onto the scene as this prophet. I called out the biggest God in the land, and God doesn't want me to do what would naturally come to me most likely, which is like attack this God, which is to call out all of the prophets of this God and say, look, your God can't even produce rain. My God has done what your God could not. No, he doesn't do any of that. He decides to, God decides to take Elijah and put him by a creek and say, stay here. There's some ravens that will come and bring you food. Ravens. You know, big black birds. Kind of scary if I'm sitting here by a creek and big black birds are bringing me food. Now, before you go, oh, well, you know, birds are bringing him things like worms and bugs and stuff. No, God makes ravens bring him bread and meat specifically. But sometimes God does that to you. If God is going to produce a great wonder in you, or is going to have your life make an impact on someone else, he is going to sit you here in this zone for a while, and he is going to say, okay, your job is to learn how to be totally sufficient on me, and then we'll get down to business. And this is not something that we want to hear, right? In our 21st century Christianity, I don't know how many times that I've heard songs people preach on or other people talk about how God wants to make them happy. Now, that's not something that we, of course, talk about because that's kind of taboo. We know not to say, God wants me to be happy, right? Because we know that that's the televangelist thing. But we do the same thing in the way that whenever there's a problem that comes up, like this problem currently happening outside, we kind of want God to take it away, right? You've probably prayed like me, hey, Lord, would you please help things to get back to normal? We want to establish that equilibrium, right? Because equilibrium's fine. We're okay at equilibrium. We talked 2 weeks ago about a spiritual savings account and a spiritual checking account. If your life is at an equilibrium stage, then you don't need your spiritual savings account, which is your complete reliance on God. You just need your checking account, which is all the stuff I have to get through things by myself. Now, God, if you could reestablish this equilibrium, I'd be just fine. I would be just fine. Yeah, okay, I'll learn whatever you want me to learn, yeah, sure, whatever, but I just want to establish equilibrium. And I don't know, it's not said if Elijah did that. I imagine that he didn't. Elijah goes and does what God has him do, because he needs to later use that reliance on God to help a widow in need. So that's what we talked about last week. This week, he's actually getting to the main event that if you are someone writing the perfect story, you would have wanted this to happen right after the drought gets called down, right? If I was writing this and this was going to be adapted for a screenplay, for example, first of all, Liam Neeson would be God, right? Because in every movie, Liam Neeson is this big role. He's Aslan. He does a lot of stuff where he's like chasing after stuff and really tense with planes and stuff. But he also has this side where he is Aslan. He is God. So I'd want Liam Neeson to be the voice of God. It just sounds like the voice of reason, right? I'm not saying that Liam Neeson is God, but, you know, anyway, I have to get back to this. So I'd want Liam Neeson to be telling my character, and I don't know who would play Elijah in this circumstance, hey, Elijah, I need you to go, and I need you to now, finally, after I've sent you to wander in the desert, I need you to go, and I need you to fight the prophets of Baal. Except I would cut out the whole part where he's next to the river. Because as a good storyteller, you don't want that. In a biblical narrative, you would probably look at this and go, what's he by a river for? I want to go have him fight in a big battle. Well, today, you get your chance. Now, I told you the reason why we don't have that. The part about Elijah being by a river is way more important than what's about to happen. because before God can produce a great work in you, he needs to build you up so that you can handle it. So that you don't run screaming into the woods like, there's a few occasions in this story Elijah could have. So if we go to 1 Kings 18, and ironically, my Bible is actually turned to the next verse because I was looking on for next week. It says Elijah and Obadiah. After a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. Hold up. So God is saying something that could be interpreted as reckless, right? You just made an affront to the biggest god in town, and there's been a guy hunting him. Ahab has been hunting Elijah. Ahab wants him dead. In Ahab's mind, Elijah probably caused the drought not because his God is better, right? Because you can't have an affront to Baal, but because Baal is now angry about Elijah. You see how you turn that on its head if you're someone that follows a false god? We'll talk about false gods later. There's one that we serve too. It's us. Anyway, so after a long time in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah was a devout believer of the Lord, while Jezebel was killing off all the Lord's prophets. Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. This guy, Obadiah, is like a secret agent. He's kind of playing 2 roles. On one hand, he is Ahab's main man. Isn't this convenient? God puts Obadiah in a cool spot. Right here, he's the main man of Ahab, a tyrannical king that wants to kill off all of the believers in God, right? And his wife Jezebel is worse. Like, if you're planning on having a daughter, I'm sorry, don't name her Jezebel. I mean, and I apologize to anyone already named Jezebel. I'm sure that you're making the name way better than it was, but my goodness, Jezebel was a bad person. She was responsible for going and slaughtering all of the believers that she could possibly find during this time. Ahab is only slightly better as her husband. But Obadiah is kind of a secret agent. He's kind of working 2 sides. He's on one hand, he's Ahab's right-hand man, but on the other hand, he's using the influence that he has to get food and water for these believers that he's hiding in caves. Isn't that cool? I mean, you never reflect on these stories in the Bible. It's so interesting, the characters and the fact that if I was writing a narrative, I wouldn't have diverted it like this, but that's what's great about the Bible. It's not a narrative, it's an actual story. So Obadiah is working the system. In verse 5 it said, Ahab had said to Obadiah, go throughout the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so that we'll not have to kill any of our animals. So they divided the land they were to cover. Ahab been going in one direction and Obadiah in another. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. So Elijah just comes out and probably surprises Obadiah. I don't know if he said boo or if he said something like that, but Obadiah is going to be shocked here. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, is it really you, my lord Elijah? Yes, he replied, go tell your master, Elijah is here. You don't notice what just happened, but basically, without doing it, Elijah is kind of telling Obadiah, go to your master and say, hey, my friend Elijah is here. I just saw him. I decided not to bring him to you because, you see, I'm a secret agent. I'm kind of working both sides, but he's here now. That's what Obadiah hears. What have I done wrong? Asked Obadiah, that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death. As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And wherever a nation or kingdom claimed that you are not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go to my master and say Elijah is here? I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab that he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here? He will kill me. Obadiah is thinking, and he says this: Elijah, I know what you're going to do, man, because you've done this before. And to be truthful, God doesn't say to the rest of the believers in the area, hey, Elijah's going down by the river for a while. I need him to do some stuff. So when God puts you on a shelf and when God makes you work for something, kind of develops your character, it will be usually a silent struggle that you're going through that no one can help you out of, that a lot of people don't know is going on. Maybe that's going on in your life right now. Maybe God is preparing you for something. And while that happens, God is He's building you up in a way that you need to develop complete reliance on Him to see everything through. And if that's happening, it's a silent struggle, whatever it is. I don't know what it is for you, but it's a silent struggle. And it was a silent struggle for Elijah. And all that Obadiah saw was that Elijah, boom, gone. And so what he thinks is, the next time that I go out of my way and do what Elijah says, who knows, he could just leave again. So it's almost kind of a mistrust that Obadiah has toward this guy. He kind of says, I'm going to go tell my boss, who, by the way, I don't really work for, and I'm kind of going behind his back anyway. I'm going to tell him that, oh yeah, Elijah's here, and then boom, you're gone again. That's what he's thinking right now. And so to be fair, he does have a good point. Elijah said, as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. Meaning, he kind of looks at Obadiah and says, hey, Obadiah, your cover is going to be totally intact. You will not be killed. Go and tell your boss that I'm here. When he comes, he'll find me. And that's what happens. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, isn't this great? Is that you, you troubler of Israel? And I'll bet this translation leaves out a whole bunch of, possible expletives that, that Ahab probably had for him. I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commandments and have followed the Baals. Now, summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel and bring 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. He says 2 things there. This means 2 things. First of all, when you're going to tell all of Israel that I'm here, I am going to, for once and for all, clarify who really rules the land. And I think God kind of had something in mind here, because if I'm Ahab and there's been a drought, and I do believe that Baal is really angry because I haven't been able to catch Elijah, the first thing I'm going to do when I catch Elijah is off with his head, right? I'm going to get rid of this this troubler of Israel, right? But instead of doing that, God kind of lets King Ahab humor Elijah a little bit. Says, hold on, we'll hear him out, see what he has to say. And Elijah says, we're going to have a showdown. Bring all your prophets, bring everyone you've got that eat at Jezebel's table. What he's trying to say is, I know how deep and crooked your worship of Baal is. I know that it's not really the people's religion, so to say. It's more of, you are making your people worship Baal. Kind of without them even having a say, right? And they eat at Jezebel's table, meaning Jezebel is in charge here. I know who's really in charge, Mr. Ahab. It's your wife. And your wife is making all of these people worship Baal and Asherah. And by the way, Baal and Asherah kind of go together. So Baal is the god of storms, but also the god of crops. And then Asherah is the god of germination of crops, or some people say fertility, but not in fertility sense of like of babies and things. It's more of fertility of the land. And so they kind of go together in the way that one is the giver of storms and things, and the other one is the giver of plant life. So that's why they would kind of go together. Baal is the more powerful god in this sense, and Asherah is a subservient god. So Ahab is in verse 20. So Ahab went throughout all of Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went down before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. It's really funny. The people, they have nothing to say to this. I don't know if they got rousted out of bed or something like that, but throughout this, until the end, the people will say nothing. Then Elijah said to them, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Not to mention the other 400 that they sent with Asherah," right? He doesn't even mention those. They're just kind of standing there. Throughout this whole thing, it's kind of like an Old West showdown in the way that it's one man against this big band of outlaws, right? You imagine just, a ton of outlaws. They've all got way more armaments and guns and stuff like that than that one sheriff in town does. But that sheriff in town, in this sense, knows the lay of the land, right? He knows that there is a bigger weapon here at play. The people said nothing. Oh, sorry. Elijah says to them, "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves." For those of you following along and you don't have your Bible in front of you, I said bull as in the cow, not bull as in the bull. "And let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God will answer. The God who answers by fire, he is God." Now, this makes a ton of sense. That he's asking. He is playing right into Baal's court. People are going to be like, for sure, because Baal is the god of storms, and at this point, there is no definitive. This would have been translated. What I'm trying to say is this would have been translated into lightning. So the God who answers by fire and or lightning. So a fire from the sky is lightning. He is God. Makes total sense. The people are going, "Hey, okay, this is something that Baal can do." Then all the people said, "What you say is good." I lied. People do talk. Then all the people said, "What you say is good." Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you." He rubs it in. "There are so many of you. Why don't you all do it? Call on the name of your God, but do not light the fire." So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. "Baal, answer us," they shouted, but there was no response. No one answered. So as far as we know, they were doing this in the wee morning hours, because it says they started, they prepared the bull, which takes a long time, prepared the altar, which would have taken a long time, would have been specifically prepared, and then all of a sudden now they, like in the morning, they start chanting. They start their ritualized chanting to Baal. And I think this is important because it kind of means, it doesn't say this exactly, but let's say that, yes, he did roust everybody out of bed, and this was done at midnight or something like that, all the way to till noon, so 12 hours. Now, we don't know if that's the amount of time that it took, but it says morning until noon. So I'm guessing when the sun came up, then they began to shout for Baal, because then another goddess, a god of night, would have been ruling. So 6 a.m., 5:30, 6 a.m., all the way to noon, they were shouting. "Baal, answer us," they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered, and they danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Now, I've heard this spoken on so many times, and I won't try and copy the responses that I have heard before from pastors that have looked at this, but I'm just going to let the Bible speak for itself. You may think that this is cruel. What Elijah is trying to do is he is trying to convince the people surrounding the prophets dancing around the altar. He's trying to convince them, like, look, what you're doing is stupid. You're following something that doesn't even exist, doesn't care that you exist at all. I'm going to show you the absolute true God. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he said. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Perhaps he is sleeping and must be awakened. Now, of course, you probably know the translation when he says perhaps he is deep in thought or busy. My Bible says busy. The translation would have been maybe he is busy going number 2. Maybe he's relieving himself. He's really leaning into this. Now, let's back up. God puts you on a shelf for a while. God kind of makes you just stay in the gym and work out for a while and develop your faith. First of all, a skeptical person would look at you and say, what are you doing? I mean, what are you sitting there waiting for God to answer your prayers for? What are you sitting there even, if they knew about your struggle, what are you going through this alone for? Why don't you, bring in reinforcements, change your job, get out of that situation? Why don't you take out a loan? That kind of thing, right? Make it happen on your own. Why are you waiting while God puts you on a shelf and just lets you ride it out? And you could. Most likely Elijah could have, started hiking down the stream to go and find food. But we don't hear that when God puts Elijah on the shelf. We just hear he obeyed because there was a bigger task to happen. So there was a stair step, right? First he's waiting by a river and getting fed by ravens all day. And then when he finally gets his faith set for the next thing, right, he moves on to the next thing, which is helping this widow. And then he resurrects her son with the power of God, right? You can't not be changed by that. And all of those things are to prepare him for standing in the middle of about 900 prophets, more people, all of which want to see him fail. And if he were to fail, they would kill him. And in the midst of that, I cannot stress enough, this man's faith is so big that he has no fear. He starts taunting the 900 prophets and more people. How hardcore is that? I want to have that kind of hardcore faith. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic... maybe he is sleeping, must be awakened. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until the blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Nothing happened. Because your God doesn't exist, guys. Our God does. Elijah's showing a couple things. He's showing, first of all, the faith that you can have if you allow God to build you up like that. But he's also showing the difference between religion and faith. If you have faith in God, it means that no matter what, you always see things through the lens of faith. If something doesn't go your way, it's not God's fault. If your car breaks down, or during this time, for example, I know a lot of us are really struggling to make payments on things, to maybe that stipend from your job hasn't come through, maybe your job hasn't come through during this time. Don't let a skeptical person in and have them convince you that God doesn't love you and that it's his fault. And it's don't let that in. Do not let that in. No matter what you think I'm going through, what you're going through, what other people don't let that in. That is not God doing that. This shows the difference between faith and religion. Religion would say, all I need to do is do 16 more Hail Marys. I just need to do more push-ups. I need to chant more of these things. I need to read this and do that. And then God will make sure my bank account's full. But that's not faith. And that's not a relationship, right? If you have offended someone, you don't go and buy them a whole bunch of stuff and then they say, "Oh, please forgive me," and give them all that. No, you don't do that. The relationship is still broken. You need to mend it. And that's the same with faith. Faith is a relationship. Faith is different. So if things start happening to us in this time, don't fall into the trap of religion and wanting to be pulled out of it. And instead, see things through faith. And so Elijah's going to show you that faith doesn't need time. There's no, in the sense of there's no amount of things I can do to make my faith grow. God's got to do it for me. He's got to help me do it. And Elijah's going to show you that, well, it just speaks for itself. I'll just keep going. So Elijah said to all the people in verse 30, "Come here to me." They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descending from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones he built the altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed, probably about 24 pounds. Sorry, I lost my place here. Your name shall be Israel. With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill 4 jars with water, and pour it on the offering and on the wood." "Do it again," he said, and they did it again. So they do it 3 times. They pour water all over this this sacrifice. Now, I talk about the teacher that I had in high school, and the way that he would turn your faith around to just inaccuracies in the Bible. And the main thing that he said to me one time was, "Jeff, if your God's true, then why did Elijah have a bunch of people pour lighter fluid all over his altar first before he lit it up?" Now, there was a substance kind of like lighter fluid that was available at this point in time, and it was a mineral oil substance that could be mined in the area, and it was used to put into lamps and things. But we know that didn't happen because, first of all, Elijah makes everybody come really close to the altar. Before that, it says he called everybody in. And then instead of pouring the water on the altar himself, he actually asks people, "Hey, I'm not going to use my own water. Go down, get your own water, pour it on this altar." "Do it a 3rd time," he ordered. They did it a 3rd time. The water ran down the altar and even filled the trench. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that the people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." When God builds up your faith, and when he puts you kind of in a corner and says, "You need to grow here. You can't leave until you grow here," God is attempting to do something with you that is dramatic, that will shape lives, that will turn people back to him. That's the reason God does this stuff. So when those kind of things happen, and when you just feel like, "Lord, I've been in the same place for so long, I'm just doing the same thing over and over and over again," there's a reason. There's a reason for that. God's about to do something huge in your life, and that's exactly what he's doing with Elijah. And Elijah's acknowledging that. He's saying, "Lord, this is all for your glory. I want you to show these people who you are right now. I get it. I get why you left me in the desert for a while with birds. I get why I had to visit that widow. You need to appear to these people and show that you're real." Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Then Elijah commanded them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away." They seized them, and Elijah had them brought down to Kishon Valley and had them slaughtered there. Very harsh. But if you're thinking about what comes next, Elijah has just not converted, but a lot of people have recognized that we have followed an idol. There is a true God. We know there's a true God now. Now Elijah just says, okay, now we can't have anything else that's of this idol around, and these prophets are of this idol. It all has to be gone. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of heavy rainfall." I'll bet he actually did this. He probably said, "I hear rain." So Ahab went off to eat and drink. But Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down on the ground, and put his face between his knees. "Go and look forward or toward the sea," he told his servant, and he went up and looked. "There's nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." I come back to this theme a lot in this message, and I'm sorry, I'm over time, so I'll get done here. But this is a man who the first time, and you can put yourself kind of in his perspective, God calls Elijah, and he says, "I want you to be my prophet. First thing I'm going to have you do is you need to make the toughest, meanest king in the land angry. Make an affront to his God. Then I'll go. You're out of the spotlight then. Now go. I need to train you up for the next thing." And as far as we know, for 3 years, Elijah was training for this exact moment. God put him in a room. He put him by a river and said, "You're going to do the same thing over and over again. You will feel probably like there's no point to your life anymore. No point at all. But you're about to make the biggest point to anyone's life after this." He then had him tested. He put him before a widow and said, help feed this widow. And then when her son dies, God performs a miraculous act through him in raising the son from the dead. But what's the point? During this time, it is hard to not see, if you've been on a shelf or you've kind of gone, "Oh boy, what now? Now I have to kill a bunch of time." But instead of watching cat videos or going to Netflix a lot and letting that rule your time, my question to you is, what is God preparing you for next? And is your time here? I don't know what your journey is. Is your time here in the sense of supporting your local church, supporting someone who is feeling it in this time? Or is God preparing you for something huge? And is it time to rekindle your prayer life? Because if God leaves you in training and nothing happens, he may just continue to leave you in training. That's kind of the way God works, because he's not in the business of getting you out of a problem just to get you out of a problem, right? Show you the door and say, "There you go, I'll deliver you." God does this, yes, but he does it for a purpose. So is your purpose to be trained up for him right now? And that's my point this week. As always, I encourage you to have a prayer time with your family. I recently heard and practiced and played a song with Canby Christian's worship team. It's called "Another in the Fire," and it is by Hillsong. So go give that one a watch. Again, that's "Another in the Fire" by Hillsong. That kind of illustrates my point. It's a song about being stuck in a lion's den or being stuck in a fiery furnace and going, where's my help? And that there's another in there with you. So go give that a watch for your worship time if you need some worship time, some meditation after that. Talk about the song with your family afterwards. It's called "Another in the Fire" by Hillsong Worship. So go look that up right now. Have a great week. I'll be back at you again next week with another one of these. My prayers are with you and for your family. I'm praying for all of the church and everybody that's listening to this, all the church around the United States right now. This might be our time. This might be our time to show the love of God in a world that really needs it and honestly is kind of sitting still waiting for it right now, if you know what I mean. So go get out there and shine your light. God, of course, can work in the 6 feet that you need to stand, right? So have a great time this week. Blessings on your week, and hope this video reached you where you were at. I'm done talking, obviously. So blessings.